AI has obviously been a thing for many years, and early adopters, you're going back 4 or 5 years in some cases. It's only just started to make its way onto job specs and job briefs for senior executive roles, unless it's a CTO, okay, within the iGaming and betting industry. I would say within the last 9 months. And even when you bring it up in conversation, it's a nice to have rather than something that's a kind of explicit requirement. It's only in the last few months where we've started to ask the conversation, how AI fluent must this individual be, whether it's a chief exec or a chief commercial officer or a chief product officer, that boards and investors and chief execs are now starting to grasp the importance of it, I think, and the user cases.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Connected with Pragmatic Solutions. If you're in business in this industry, you know that people make the product. It's the people behind the business that really govern the success of those that pull ahead in this business, and separates the winners from the losers. Ultimately, it comes down to the quality of the management team and the strategy that you have behind the business. So finding the right people and placing the right people is a critical part of being successful in the iGaming industry. Nobody knows this landscape better than Andrew Bulloss, partner and head of global gaming practice at Odgers, one of the world's leading executive search firms, and specializes in senior leadership appointments across the iGaming industry. Andrew, welcome to Connected.
Thank you, Ashley. Nice to be here.
Yeah. It's great to talk to you. You and I have known each other for many years. We were just talking a moment ago that you've been established this practice within Odgers 16 years ago. We've had many opportunities to speak over the years, and I've come to really respect what you do. I think it's a function within the industry, within any industry, that is often taken for granted, but really plays such a critical role in putting together the right team to address the challenge at the time. And I think you do a really good job of connecting, understanding the business and putting the right people into it. Thanks for talking to me today about this. I look forward to unpacking this with you a bit more.
No worries. No, thank you. Looking forward to it myself. Good.
So let's get started with what leaders or founders or boards are looking for in CEOs or key senior executives within the business. What are the CEOs or the investors looking for? And what are they asking for in today's market from senior positions in the business? What kind of skills or character are they looking for? And what has changed in the demands placed on the executives in the recent years?
So I think this really depends on what type of board and company you're talking to, Ashley. So if I take, let's call them kind of grey markets. So in grey or regulating markets, there's still very much a clear desire for what I would call kind of fast, efficient growth. So you win market share quickly, reinvest, keep building. In a kind of listed and or kind of highly regulated environment, I think the demand has moved from grow fast to grow fast, do it responsibly, and be able to prove that you're doing it responsibly. So I think leaders now are being held to much tighter regulation across more jurisdictions all at once. It's incredibly complex. The kind of reputational risk, I suppose, attached to the business and to the leaders themselves, excuse me, is now very much a regular board agenda item. And I think boards want leaders who are able to show judgment, show transparency, and certainly through the eyes of an investor, whether you operate in regulated or grey markets, investors want leaders that bring rigour. They want leaders that bring discipline, not just ambition. So I think it's now, particularly in the world in which we live in 2026, it's the ability to stay calm, see clearly, and be decisive. It's not about getting distracted. There's lots of distractions in life at the moment, and it's not about getting distracted. So how can you be decisive, stay calm, and see clearly? So it's about vision. And then I think when you look at this sector, it's about then layering on commerciality, tech literacy. I don't think you can operate in this industry unless you are tech literate. Where are we going? What value are we creating? And how can we leverage tech to create a USP and create really clear outcomes? And if it's a regulated operator or regulated business, to do it in a responsible way.
it's traditionally been a very entrepreneurial-led industry. You know, if we go back to the origins of the industry, it required a lot of thickness of skin and a risk-taking attitude and a willingness to tackle whatever challenges came from a lot of the territory being uncharted. Um, it's evolved a bit. I mean, we have regulation that dominates most of the market activity these days comes from regulated markets, but as you've already alluded to, there's still a very significant gray market sector. Has the type of individual that is suited for a leadership position has it evolved from the entrepreneurial weight behind that type of character, or how has it changed over the last decade, let's say?
Yeah, I think it has changed. I think there's still a need for entrepreneurialism, and there's definitely still a need for thick skin, to use your words. But I think if you go back 10 years ago, the sector rewarded hustle and it rewarded speed. It was often founder led. I'm not saying those two things aren't relevant in 2026, but it was often founder led, arguably a little less structured, and everyone was building and everyone was in growth mode. And if you look at the industry today, it's international. We talked about the regulation aspect of it, and structurally, it's more complex. And I think that forces a different leadership style. So I think it's forced leaders to do a number of different things. One to be a bit more big picture in the way that they approach their roles. So sometimes you need to be in the weeds, sometimes you need to be in the detail. I totally get that, even as a CEO. But then you've got to be able to raise your head and look at what's ahead and what's in the future. Things are shifting so fast. There are more regulated markets opening. There's shifts from monopoly to licensing regimes in certain markets. There's new markets opening, and there's more and more M&A. There's more and more consolidation as companies look to buy either scale, capabilities, new licenses, distribution, product tech, etc. So I think leaders have had to shift from being the person that does everything to actually designing organizations that can scale and deliver across multiple markets. But I also think that bigger picture piece lands well if you're working for a smaller company as well. And there's plenty of smaller companies out there, plenty of scale ups, plenty of companies looking to kind of upset the status quo, for want of a better phrase. You know, what are the bigger, more established firms not doing that a scale up might be able to capitalize on? Where's the niche? Where's the bit that's missing? How can I fill the gap, I suppose, as an organization? So, and then I think, so they're the kind of skills, knowledge, and experience. I think there's also a change to style as well in some of the leaders in this sector. So, sweeping generalization, but I think a lot of leaders from 10 years ago were very command and control. And I think a lot of people would say that the industry was pretty ego driven. And arguably, some might say it still is in some areas as well. But I think the balance now is the leaders that are thriving are the ones that can balance confidence with no hint of ego, with that sense of humility. So less ego in the room, less ego-based decisions, more decisions driven by logic or driven by data, not the need to seem to be right all the time. So I think it's about more self-awareness, more emotional intelligence. They seem to be the prevailing theme from C-level execs that I'm talking to, from boards, from investors. So I think it's a style change as much as it is a skills, knowledge, and experience change.
It's always interesting to me when I have guests on this podcast, we get into a topic. I realize how much there is actually to unpack about a topic. More questions are coming to my mind just hearing you talk. For one thing, taking a step back for a second, I think you place people or seek support companies that are looking to round out their management teams in both B2B and B2C. So one question comes to mind is there a difference in skill sets or types of individuals that are better suited for a B2B business versus a B2C business, or do you not separate the field that way?
Yeah, I think we do. I think so. If I think about B2B and it's all about business models, right? So you've got to think, okay, well, what's the business model and success criteria that's going to allow a B2B business to thrive versus a B2C organization? I think there are generic skills and experiences. Let's take a chief exec. There are generic skills and traits that you would want in a CEO, regardless of whether it's B2B and B2C. And I can come back to that later on. But I think, from B2B point of view, what have you got to do? You've got to look at it through the eyes of a customer. You've got to give them the products and services and technology that you think they need, and also that they don't know they need at this stage. You've got to be able to manage a go-to-market plan. You've got to be able to manage sales and business development teams across multiple markets. You've got to be able to manage a customer success function. You've then got to be able to oversee everything from product to tech to compliance to customer service, everything in between. So, yeah, and then you look at a B2C organization, you've still got to have the customer at the heart of everything that you do. That's the kind of the the clear kind of thread, I suppose, the red thread between both. But just the teams are different. Yes, you've got a product team. Yes, you've got a tech team. But here you've got a much bigger marketing team. You've got a CRM team. You've got arguably a much more potentially robust data and BI team. It's just the teams are different, but the skill sets are largely the same. You've still got to think strategic. You've still got to be able to lead people and set a vision and set a goal for everybody to get behind. You've still got to win hearts and minds. And then all the soft traits around curiosity and resilience, and they're all the same. So very, very similar in terms of generic traits, but it just depends on the type of business. I think one final thing on this, it also depends on the business and the stage at which it's at. So inheriting a business from a founder versus running a listed entity that's very well established across multiple markets, that requires a very different skill set. But some of the generic traits are still there. It's just which ones do you overplay versus underplay, if that makes sense.
I've often had a sense for this. I've never had an opportunity to ask someone in your position about it, but is there the right person for the right stage in a business? And sometimes that individual, although perfectly suited for stage one of a business, isn't the right person for the next phase of the business, or vice versa. And how do you help organizations identify what stage they're at and match the right individual to the phase of business that they're facing into, not necessarily the one they've been in?
So yes, is the quick answer. Certainly, in my opinion, anyway. I think that certain people's skill sets are suited to the age of an organization, particularly if you're looking at a CEO role. Okay, so if you are going into let's say you're going into a Series B, Series C, Series D venture capital backed business, right? And you're inheriting that business from a founder, and the founder's taken it from A to B. The immediate question that comes to my mind is, what are the challenges that this business is going to face to get it from B to C? And if the founder's not capable of doing that, what skills, knowledge, and experience does the individual need to be able to take it from where it is now to wherever the investors or the chief exec need to get it? Okay. So that then dictates what we look for in the individual. So is it about pivoting from, I hate to use that word, but you know what I mean? Is that about pivoting from being a one product business to a multi-product business? Is it about shifting from a single market operator to a multi-market operator? Is it about approaching a totally different demographic of customer? Is it about layering in a whole range of different brands and becoming a multi-product, multi-brand business rather than a one-brand business? Not everybody will have that experience, and not everybody will be able. Some people will have that experience in bigger organizations, but then putting it into place in a much smaller business where you're having to deal with the investors, you're having to deal with the board, you're having to deal with the emotions of a founder sometimes. That requires a different mentality than doing that in a much bigger organization.
Fit is really important too, though. And I've found that sometimes you have a perfectly talented and great experienced individual, but they may not fit with the others on the team. So I suppose finding the right individual for the role also requires some understanding of what the team composition is that they'll be joining and what sort of personalities are there. When you're undertaking a placement or a search for an organization, do you try to get a feel for the other players on the team first to figure out the sort of personality type that is going to be an add to that arrangement rather than an adjutant? Maybe agitation is good.
Well, and this is the question, isn't it? It depends why the hire is being made. Is the hire being made to run a, and I'm kind of looking at this through the lens of hiring a CEO. So, is the hire being made to run a business as usual business with a very, very capable team of people that just need either fresh perspective, a fresh vision, a new goal, some fresh impetus, some new motivation, etc. But actually, they're very capable. Or is this individual going in to run a business where there are going to need to be some difficult decisions made on the leadership team, and therefore fit is less important, arguably less important. They still need to be able to fit in with the culture of the business. And it's interesting, I had this conversation with someone last week. If you're hiring a CEO, how much do you want them to fit with the culture of the organization versus deciding on what the culture of the organization should actually be? And it also, correct. And it also comes down to, what do the shareholders want? Is this change being agitated by a private equity fund? Is it being agitated by a venture capital fund? Is it being called for by public shareholders? So yes, we would always go in and try to understand what's the culture of the organization. How do decisions get made? What's the pace of the business? What's the communication cadence within the organization, and try and find people that fit with that. We're doing a piece of work at the moment with I won't say who it is, but a Scandinavian organization, and it's got a very kind of collaborative, open door kind of consensus culture. And the individual coming into that needs to be able to adapt into that, because that's how the business has been run for the last 10 years. And therefore, if they can't adapt to that, then it's going to be difficult for them to win the hearts and minds of the people in the business and the employees. But then they also need to find a way to get this business from here to here. And that's going to require an adaptation of culture and some culture change. So I think it depends on the scenario, really. Who's behind the appointment? Why the appointment's being made? They would be the two questions I'd be looking to ask from the outset, really.
Interesting. Um, Again, you've provoked some other thoughts, but I don't want to lose a train that we're on in terms of uh, logical next question. But um, there has to be some impact of late in terms of AI and technical, uh, the accelerated pace with which technology is evolving. Um, Technology alone used to be a moat or a differentiator in the industry. Nowadays, the technical estate of an operator is largely comprised of best of breed suppliers for specific services, and I think there's perhaps a shift in emphasis away from necessarily technology being the primary factor that dictates whether a company is going to succeed or not, or outpace a competitor, but more about tactical thinking, willingness to adapt to this change as it's happening, and to embrace the potential of what can be achieved. But at the same time, I think we also see all sorts of companies making misguided steps of overstepping towards AI, changing the business or changing the staffing requirements their workforce, and finding out through trial and undoubtedly error that they've imagined the capabilities were greater today than they actually are. What impact do you see technology change having? You've mentioned that it's almost impossible to operate in this industry at a senior level without some technical nous. But is the shift changing, and what are stakeholders looking for from their executive teams as they head into an AI world? And how has that governed the brief that you have when looking
Yeah.
for senior executives?
I think just some context here. I have to say, I mean, AI has obviously been a thing for many years, and early adopters, you're going back 4 or 5 years in some cases. Um, it's only just started to make its way onto job specs and job briefs for senior executive roles, unless it's a CTO, okay, within the iGaming and betting industry. I would say within the last 9 months. And even when you bring it up in conversation, it's a nice to have rather than something that's a kind of explicit requirement. It's only in the last few months where we've started to ask the conversation, how AI fluent must this individual be, whether it's a chief exec or a chief commercial officer or a chief product officer, that boards and investors and chief execs are now starting to grasp the importance of it, I think, and the user cases. I also think it depends on the size of business that you're looking at. So based on my experience of talking to C-level execs in the sector, the bigger companies are using AI more as a way to drive change internally. So they're looking at it through the lens of productivity, operational rigor, and efficiency. Okay. It's the smaller businesses that are using AI to drive product and externally facing propositions, arguably because they don't have loads of legacy technology to deal with. I think the leaders that really grasp this and grasp AI are the ones that choose where they spend their time on AI. So they're choosing their kind of AI projects wisely, I suppose. So they're starting small, they're choosing an area of focus. They might be building a small team. They might be building or looking at how does AI influence this particular team or influence this product or influence this function? And they're allocating people to own those projects.
Yeah, we've seen outside the industry, certainly, and recently I've seen a couple of cases inside the industry where there's specific senior roles created for AI implementation within an organization.
Yep. But not in this sector yet.
Mm.
I mean, we've just done a piece of work in our media with our media team, who've built this organization have built a brand new AI studio. So they're creating medium and long form content exclusively using AI tools. And we've helped them to find a studio director and a creative director. Those roles they've never existed before. They're brand new roles in the industry. So it's really interesting. So we're starting to see these roles that are now being created that weren't there even 12, 18 months ago. I'm not seeing that yet in this sector. I also think it's about the culture that you create. So AI adoption doesn't have to come from the top. If you give people across the business the tools to experiment and see what comes out of that experimentation phase, and you drive innovation from the bottom up rather than imposing it on people from the top down, arguably you're going to get a better sense of outcomes, you're going to get more innovation. So I think it is about the culture and how open-minded, I suppose, the leadership team are and the board are to using tools like this. But it's the AI native businesses that are fairly obviously leveraging it rather than the bigger operators and bigger suppliers.
Yeah, I think increasingly, though, that's going to become something that, if senior boards or senior leadership that's looking to recruit isn't already thinking about, I wouldn't be surprised if you see that more and more emphasis on at least a lean in towards the capabilities for organizations to leverage AI.
We've taken two briefs in the last week, actually, one for a chief product officer within a consumer operator, and one for a CEO in the B2B space. And both of the job specs have notably mentioned AI, within the top 3 or 4 different requirements. And that's one in B2C, one in B2B. So it's starting to show through in job specs, whereas 6 months ago it wasn't.
Okay, well, that might be an interesting segue to another topic, which is, talent coming into this industry from outside the industry. And it's funny. One thing I've said a few times, maybe it's a bit of a baseball analogy, so maybe my North American roots are showing. But in baseball, the next batter up to plate swings 2 bats in practice, so that when it's his turn up to bat, he drops one, and it feels much lighter now by comparison when it's his turn at the plate. And I've always felt, for those of us working in this industry, if we ever went outside of iGaming, the experience that we've had in such a competitive, cutting-edge technology, regulatory-bound, global business, moving outside of iGaming would seem easy in so many. Maybe that's the perspective that many of us have, is that what we're doing in this industry is a much more complex challenge than you have in standard e-commerce, let's say, right? But nobody ever leaves. It seems like it's so rare that someone leaves the industry once you've made your way into it. So maybe that's less of a concern, but I think companies often think to attract talent from outside the industry. maybe particularly when it comes to technology, because there may be technology skill sets that are relevant to where the industry is going that are more at a mature stage outside of this industry and where talent could be brought in. Is that a remit that you often have from organizations that they're looking to bring new ideas and new talent from outside the industry? And what is your pitch like when speaking to someone who is in a senior position outside the industry when you're talking to them about iGaming? Is that a difficult conversation? Is it, and what do you set out as the attractive aspects of this industry that might have them consider it where they wouldn't have before?
Okay, and just to your point, people never leave. People do leave, but then they come back again. So they leave and they might spend 3, 4 years somewhere else and they go, actually, I miss it. I want to come back. Um, I think this is easier to do in certain areas of a business. So it's much easier to bring people in from outside of sector in functional roles. So finance, arguably tech, HR and people, legal. That tends to be where the most movement is. Potentially marketing. That tends to be where the most movement is from out of sector into sector. I wouldn't be. We've tried it before. We've been curious about it. Trading directors, for example, for sports books. Is that someone from inside a sector? 99% of the time, yes. Could it be someone from a trading background within a bank or a financial institution? Possibly. We've explored it. We've never quite found the kind of silver bullet solution from outside a sector. You could argue the same for product related roles. You could argue the same for things like in operators, casino and iGaming heads. It's a very specific skill set that's required in order to be successful. I think, but though, this is also about whether or not a business needs to figure out whether they have a culture that would embrace someone from outside. So the reason a lot of these appointments from outside industry don't work is when people inside the company don't give those people a chance. They're skeptical of the value they can bring because they are, in inverted commas, an outsider. They judge a little bit too quickly. They don't give them the chance to succeed. So I think if you're going to look out of sector, think about how that person's going to land in your business with your current people and what's the onboarding strategy to enable them to be successful.
And I think we often in this industry underestimate how much specific industry knowledge there is. Jargon as just the most basic example. And when bringing somebody in from outside, forget very quickly all that you were attracted to bringing that individual in for their experience and talent, and become immediately frustrated by their knowledge gap in the specific industry knowledge that you could only get by being in the industry. And so I think your point of being more patient or being more prepared with your onboarding process to anticipate those kind of challenges is a good point.
And it's funny. I mean, if you're doing a C-level hire, I mean, some of these processes take a long time, and you meet this person anywhere from minimum 3 or 4 times to 6 to 7 times. You're gathering a lot of information on this individual. You're kind of dating them, for want of a better phrase, for a significant period of time, and then suddenly they land on day one, and you don't tell them how decisions are made, and you don't tell them what to look for in a KPI dashboard, and you just kind of expect them to know. I mean, give them the opportunity to be successful. Tell them how things work. Don't make it a rite of passage, and a lot of organisations make it a rite of passage. So I think it's about supporting people when they come on board. In answer to your other question, what's the pitch? I think on the positive side, the industry is highly competitive. People like to work in highly competitive markets. It's hugely international. There are huge amounts of data to play with. Not always accessible, but the data's there. It is a tech-enabled business, tech-enabled industry. It's a challenged industry. Yeah. It doesn't stand still. It's a mix of big corporates, private equity-backed businesses, scale-ups. There's a lot going for the sector. Okay. On the flip side, what do candidates worry about? They worry about reputational risk, the dinner party conversations, work in the gambling industry. They worry about regulatory instability, and they worry about whether leadership teams are serious about sustainable practices, sustainable working practices. Are they putting the player, are they putting the customer at the heart of everything that they do? So this is where culture matters. This is where purpose matters. And this is where having really good, ethically minded, commercially minded leadership teams and very clear values within an organization make a difference. And it's those organizations that are likely to attract talent from outside of sector, whereas the ones that maybe sail a little bit close to the wind, excuse me, won't.
That's a good point. There's a stigma associated with the industry that may be a barrier for some people to overcome when looking at joining a gaming company.
It's quite binary. It genuinely is quite binary. So whenever we approach people for roles outside of sector, they will have a view, and it tends to be yes or no. And no means the conversation stops fairly quickly. It's very rare people sit on the fence.
And
And
has
for
that
those,
changed over the years? I mean, now there's so many
not
locally
really,
regulated markets. Has that not changed public perception?
not really. No, I think it's always been yes or no whenever we approach people from outside of sector. But just the number of people that say yes versus the number of people that say no would shift up and down depending on how often the industry's been in the press. But it's not. It's typically 50-50, 50-50, maybe 60-40 in favour of the no's. But the people that do say yes, there's also a number of other factors that an employer can show in order to win them over versus another business. What's your USP? What's your USP in a crowded market, whether you're a supplier or an operator? How do you use tech, product, and data to drive your strategy and be in control of your own destiny rather than, I shouldn't say this given who's hosting the podcast, but rather than beholden to suppliers? Okay.
Hmm.
What's your culture? What's your vision? What's your purpose? Do you have clear direction? Is there a strategy and does everybody know what it is? Your level of regulatory risk and the quality of your people. And ordinarily, if you're going to meet with another organization, whether it's for a chief exec role or a C-suite role, people buy other people, especially in leadership roles. And so as an employer, do you have great people that new members of a senior leadership team will want to work with? And if so, show them through that interview process to make sure that they see the quality of those people. So there's lots of hooks and things that you can kind of hang your hat on to attract the right people from outside of sector if they say yes.
Yeah, and I guess you're saying not only have that strategy, have that vision, have those values and principles, but be able to demonstrate them and articulate them and have your team that the candidate will be introduced to believe them and be passionate about them.
Yeah. And everyone's got to be able to be joined up in the messaging as well. As soon as there's inconsistency around the messaging, that's where it becomes very, very difficult to get people's buy-in.
Well, for those of you that have watched this far in the podcast, you probably fall into one of two categories. You're either running an organization that's trying to build out or strengthen or change the composition of your team, or you're a senior executive who's thinking about the next step in the industry for you in your career and how to navigate that. So, Andrew, let's help both of those listeners. Let's start first with the senior team that's looking to add another player to the team, that's looking to recruit. What are the key skills or what leadership qualities that they should be looking for? Is there a checklist that you say at the highest level, if you're going to bet on an individual, look for these qualities and you've de-risked your bet?
Yeah. Before I go through that, because this is I've kind of I've ascertained what the top 4 or 5 behavioural traits are of successful iGaming CEOs. I've had 25 to 30 conversations with iGaming chief execs over the course of the last 6 to 9 months, and there were 5 key themes that came out of it, which I'll share in a moment. But I think if you are an organisation going out to try and find a new member of your senior leadership team, make sure you know why this person is being hired. People often go out to market for a CCO or a COO for roles that don't really have enough backbone, enough accountability, enough teeth, for want of a better phrase. So I think people will buy into a role. Well, people will buy into a role that has meaning. If you're an individual being approached about a role, you want to know that you are joining an organization and your role has meaning. So I think before you go out to market, make sure that the role that you have has very clear accountabilities and goals attached to it, and there's a very clear reason for wanting to hire this individual rather than just hiring a COO because that's what you've always had. I think when you think about the traits of senior leaders, there's kind of five, I would say. One is self-awareness. So this is about someone that understands what their impact is, takes feedback on board, learns from it, adapts. It's about emotional intelligence. So are you aware of who you are and how you are perceived, and what are you doing to play to your strengths and adapt your development areas, or upgrade your development areas? Second one is curiosity, and I've talked about this a lot. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll know that I'm a huge advocate for people who are curious. Okay, good. Three is about, and particularly in the world in which we live in 2026, being able to show judgment, and being able to show judgment when there are periods of uncertainty, which there are right now. So how do you commit to decisions, and how do you make a course of action without all the facts at hand? I think number four is the ability to scale above the day to day. Yeah. So how do you think? I talked about it earlier. How do you think big picture? What's the vision? What's the plan? What's the strategy? How do we get there? How do you build teams? How do you delegate responsibility? How do you create a culture of empowerment and accountability? You are going to need to dip in to figure out when things go right, why do things go right? And when things go wrong, why do things go wrong? Because that informs your opinions, informs your judgment. But give people the responsibility. Yeah. And then I think the final thing is about what I'm calling corporate maturity. So particularly as a CEO, you're in a position of power, you're in a position of influence. How do you use that power? How do you use that influence? How do you use it to work up to the board or to the investors or out to regulators and public shareholders or public stakeholders? How do you use it with your peers? And how do you use it within the people, with the employees, with the people within the company? How do you use it down? So I think, look, for me, they were the critical 4 or 5 things that came out of all the conversations that I've had with chief execs over the course of the last 6 to 9 months. And I basically just asked the question, what advice would you pass on to an aspiring CEO? They were the common ones.
I think they're great. It's obviously that you've had the right exposure to the right people. I mean, some of them seem obvious, but I think they can easily be overlooked. I think curiosity is a great one. I think curiosity is another form of not turning back at the first hurdle. Is wondering, well, there must be a way around this challenge. There must be a way to overcome. Why do we do it that way? Why do we say that's the only way this can be done? Maybe it's an acceptable answer, but I'm curious to know, right? And I think these are very good points. I've often said when recruiting that it seems like a process where me as the prospective employer get to ask all the questions and do all the qualification. But I always like to see a similar level of due diligence being done by the candidate on us as an organization, on me as an individual, on the colleagues that they're going to work with. Not just because it demonstrates to me that they are assertive and value their own time and next career phase, but also because for this to work long term, it has to be a match for both of us. I could convince you to join my organization, but if I don't understand what you're looking for in the next phase of your career, and I'm not prepared to deliver against that, it's not going to last, and you'll be looking for the next opportunity. So is there, first off, do you agree? And secondly, is there questions that you would encourage candidates for senior roles to ask of organizations that maybe people overlook, they don't do enough due diligence on when they're looking at taking a position?
You are 100% correct. People people should be doing, if you're going for a CEO role or any C-level leadership role, you should be investing time and effort into the process to make sure that you not only present your own experiences and skills and style and approach, but that you've shown that you're investing the time. You've shown a level of motivation. You've shown a level of interest in business. And it's amazing how many people fall at the first hurdle because they just don't do that. It's all about them, right? It's all about how they can present themselves. And actually, when you say, okay, well, put yourself in the hot seat, right? You're going for a chief exec role. Put yourself in the hot seat. What do you think is going to be on your to-do list? You know, in this business from day one. I'm not sure. I'd need to know more about the business. Wrong answer. You've got to have an opinion. You've got to have a perspective. So
Oh,
it,
and maybe you've got to have done a little bit of research before you get to that meeting.
totally, totally. And then look, they're the sort of questions that we're asking, as the search firm. The organisation are going to be asking much more difficult questions. So if you can't answer the ones that we're asking, you're going to struggle to answer the ones that the investors are asking or the board's asking. So I think it's about coming armed with, look, what do I know already about this business? What don't I know? And being honest about what you don't know. And the ability to ask good questions comes back to some of the things that we've spoken about. It comes back to being curious. Okay, so if I don't know the answer to that, what questions do I need to ask in order to find the answer? It also comes back to showing judgment. So you turn up to an interview and you say, okay, well, this is what I know, this is what I know, but tell me about this. Tell me about culture. Tell me about product. Tell me about technology. Tell me about the mindset of the founders. Tell me about the mindset of the investor. What's their exit plan? Tell me about how decisions get made. What mistakes have they made in the past as an organization that they want to avoid in the future? Where do they think the opportunities are? Where are the challenges? What's their funding roadmap look like? I mean, these are all very, very sensible questions. Is there what does success? Absolutely. What does success look like? How am I going to be measured? It's amazing how many people don't ask that. What are my goals? What are the goals attached to this role? What's the quality of the people around me? How do they compare? How do they see themselves against the competition? What's the niche that they want to fill? I mean, loads. There is no killer question. There's just lots of killer questions. But I think the most important advice that I give to people when we present people to an organization to go and meet them is have an opinion. Have an opinion on the business. You might not have all the answers, but have an opinion on the organization as an outsider looking in. What do you think is keeping the current CEO awake at night?
Actually, and if I speak from someone who's been in that interviewing position, I've had people come with an opinion that maybe wasn't right, but I valued the fact that they had one, and maybe they didn't have all the information. Maybe there was more exposure that they need to tune in a bit, but they at least had taken a position and brought something to the table to the discussion. I think it's
Totally.
really whether I guess what the point I'm trying to make is have the confidence to have an opinion to bring to that discussion, even if you taking some risk that you may not be right, because just the act of doing a bit of research and formulating a view will start a discussion and will demonstrate some sort of nous.
And you can caveat your opinion. Look, I don't have all the answers, but based on what I know so far,
Right.
and based on the
Sure.
feedback, based on the information and due diligence that I've done, these are the three things that I think are going to be most important if I'm coming into this job.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Well, Andrew, this is like a really interesting topic. We could probably go on for quite some time about it because every every question and the way you respond to it leads me to a few more thoughts. But let's take one last question for today, and that is, I'm sure there's people listening who have yet to have their first senior C-suite role in an organization, and they want to get there, and maybe the next step in their career is going to be into one of those roles. And I wanted to ask you, if you've not been at the senior exec level in the industry yet, are there things you could be doing to better yourself, prepare yourself for eligibility in a senior role? Is there things that let's say upper middle tier management positions can do to be better perceived as candidates for C-suite positions?
Yep, totally. So I think let's give you three, lots of things, but let's give you
Oh,
three.
great. Okay, let's go.
I think first thing is find a mentor. And it
Great point.
doesn't
Great
have to
point.
be someone from inside the sector.
And what is the conversation with that mentor about?
So this is about someone whose opinion that you trust, someone who has perhaps been on the journey that you've been on and can help you figure out what are the pitfalls, what are the obstacles, what are the challenges, and knows you well enough to be able to provide valuable advice as to where you are now versus where you want to get to. Whether it's a mentor, whether it's a coach, both equally good. But I think it's someone who you can have a really open, transparent discussion with, and also someone that you can just bounce ideas off. I've got this problem.
I was going to say there's sort of a counselor factor to that, where sometimes
Correct.
just the act of articulating what's on your mind, even if they're not providing you much feedback, is already a step forward.
You often know the answer in your head, but just talking it through will illuminate the answer that you already knew.
And you need somebody qualified, but who is, not exposed in your current team, that you can have a safe
No conflict.
conversation with.
Yes, someone where
Yeah.
there's no conflict.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Number
number
one.
one.
Number two.
Number two is, and this is easier. This is harder to do and easier to say, is try and get a non-exec or board advisor role, because what that will enable you to do is see what happens around the boardroom. It will illuminate you and it will educate you to the types of conversations that happen at board level. It will help you understand the mindset of investors. It will help you understand the mindset of the chair, the non-execs, the chief exec. It doesn't even have to be a paid. Go and get yourself a trustee role on a charity.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna add two things to that from my experience, Andrew, if I may. It would be one, be prepared to volunteer. Right? If it gets you access, you're getting paid already, and that's part of what you'll learn is maybe demystifying what you think you don't already know. You might come to realize you're already prepared for the types of discussions that are happening, and it is an imperfect science sometimes. And just because it's the boardroom doesn't mean all the answers are always readily available in every session. And I think that might take some of the intimidation away from what's preventing you otherwise from putting yourself forward in a senior role. I think that's okay. You're two for two so far. What's your number three?
Number three, and this requires a reasonable amount of courage and bravery, is ask for feedback. What do people really think of you? So, what are you great at? Keep doing that. What needs work? And ask the people who you think may not have a favorable impression of you, because that's where you really start to understand what your true perception is. And then just choose one thing you want to change and do that for 30 days and see if it makes a difference.
Oh, I like that. I like that. And I think the other detail there is try to receive that feedback in a non-defensive way.
Yeah,
And, try not to respond and just give yourself 30 minutes to digest before you. The objective of receiving the feedback is not to try to disqualify it, but rather to listen to it. No?
correct. So that would be my three.
Andrew, real pleasure speaking with you about this. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this has been a really informative discussion, and one I'd like to continue with you on another occasion. Let's do that. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of your team at Odgers?
Just ping me on email, andrew.bullos@odgers.com, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Okay, and we'll include links to that below the video. Thank you for joining me today, Andrew, and thank you for joining us on Connected with Pragmatic Solutions. See you next
No
time.
worries at all. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Ashley.